Hello, my name is Rolando Zubiran, and it's a pleasure for me to be here in this event, Torocon, to talk a little bit about Web3, marketing in Web3, and how the evolution of Web 1 to Web 3 has brought forth great opportunities, particularly in the way brands communicate with customers, in the way they experience their new value propositions through what we're calling the age of experience internet, and obviously this wonderful new era that we are calling the marketing in the age of the ownership economy. So if you allow me to give a little bit of framing a little bit the discussion of what we could envision as marketing in Web3, it is important to start by framing the narrative of how Web 1 has actually evolved into Web 3. Now, this evolution, so-called evolution of the internet. And to frame it very simply, I would like for us to start envisioning the evolution of Web 1 to Web 3 in very simple concepts. And I would like for you to think about Web 1 as a very static, very static time or representation of the internet, in which we could denominate it as Web 1 being an internet where there was only reading and writing. No, it was a read and write internet. There was not a lot of communication. It was one-sided. No, there was a lot of companies that would advertise themselves in the internet. That we're talking about the 90s, and it would be more of a directory. We could even refer it as the yellow pages. No, a digital version of the yellow pages, where companies would actually put their address. They would actually communicate a little bit about what they do, and there was not a lot of interaction. It was a little bit of a one-sided communication, and this is what we could call the era of Web 1, no? A very read and write web. As we evolved this technological path or growth of the internet, we embarked into the era of Web 2. And Web 2 has a fundamental characteristic, because Web 2, as a lot of people actually point out, it has this beautiful component of interactivity. No, you can read and write, but you can also interact. No, but interactivity comes with a cost, and I think not a lot of people realize this. That there's a trade-off of being able to actually interact in the internet, and this interactivity came into a direct, I would say, not juxtaposition, but it came in direct conflict with the consumer or with the user, sometimes without the user even knowing it. Because now we're looking at the birth of Web 2 as we know it, which is a beautiful space where you can read, write, interact, but the trade-off is that you have to provide your data. Correct? And it's the birth of the big centralized players who actually tell you, yes, let me use this internet. Let me provide you this infrastructure in which you can interact amongst users. You can have peer-to-peer transactions. You can trade goods, services, or informations, and we'll let you use it, maybe perhaps even for free. But the small trade-off is that you have to share with us your data, whether it's your email or whether it's perhaps your credit card information or some relevant information about you. And there's this famous phrase, no, that says that when you're getting something for free, sometimes you are the product. This is in great part this burst of the internet, no, as we currently know it, which is the era of large intermediaries such as Google as an interface layer 1 platform that allows you to access and browse millions and millions of content and data points, right? But you have to give your data. And this era of huge intermediaries obviously led birth to great audience platforms, correct? And in marketing, if we envision that we are, as companies, trying to target consumers, obviously we like to have ecosystems in which we can leverage audiences. No, so if we look at a platform like Facebook, now Meta, or a platform like let's say, YouTube, people actually access and produce content and distribute it within those platforms because they want to target specific audiences and they want to broaden their reach. And I think this is a fundamental aspect of Web 2, which is characteristic of the birth of this multi-billion-dollar platforms, in which their value proposition is, let me provide you this platform for free, in which if you only provide me your data and you upload it, then we can make it available to millions and millions of potential users, which obviously in return, they're actually going to be aware of your value proposition. And the targeting advertising then comes into play when these intermediary players actually leverage the data that you provided them to actually monetize in a different way. So if we see this evolution from Web 1 as a static web, we then evolved into this beautiful, complex Web 2 that is able to read, write, interact with a trade-off of data, correct? And prior to this evolution to Web 3, there was not a lot of mechanisms for users to actually be able to transact, communicate, or exchange goods and services, or even information without the use of these central intermediary platforms. And here's where the story becomes very, very interesting and very disruptive, is that you have this beautiful technology that is not new, no? It has its origins in cryptography, no? And takes a lot of reference and takes a lot of relevance as a disruptive technology with the envisionment of a white paper by Satoshi Nakamoto, and this technology is called blockchain. And what blockchain fundamentally allows is to create an infrastructure or a network, we could call it, in which peer-to-peer transactions can happen and individuals or stakeholders can actually communicate without the need of centralized intermediaries. And this is a fundamental change that disrupts the entire ecosystem and has very, very significant implications in how the future of the internet is evolving and will evolve, thanks to this fundamental, simple technology, which is very simple in its conception, very complex in its potential applications, right? But it's a technology that, in summary, allows an actor A to actually be able to communicate with an actor B without the need of an intermediary in a safe way through the exchange of information, which is recorded, distributed among the network, and validated in a way that once it is recorded, it cannot be altered, providing, obviously, security, but also reliability, and providing the potential to actually develop new products and new solutions. So if we envision this shift now from a Web 1 to a Web 2, how would I frame the definition of Web 3 is this beautiful evolution from reading and writing to reading and writing and interacting in exchange for your data to now reading, writing, interacting, and owning. This capacity for you to actually own your data, leverage the power of your data, create value propositions from products, services, data, exchange of information among stakeholders, but doing so in a decentralized way, where the user actually has the capacity to leverage its own data, leverage its own intellectual property, and monetize it or exchange it for value as he sees fit. So if we see this natural and beautiful evolution of Web 1 to Web 2 to Web 3, we then start seeing that the scope of potential is very, very large. And what is this potential scope? Is the ability for individuals to actually create their own platforms aside from these large intermediaries and create novel solutions in which individuals can actually extract and create value. So now that we're framing this debate of the internet, I think it's important also to deaggregate a little bit of a lot of concepts that actually get get all put in the same basket and actually make a lot more complex the debate of Web3, no? Because we talk about Web3 being blockchain based, and then we talked about the metaverse, and then we talk about gaming, and we talk about tokenization, and we talk about NFTs, and we could talk about cryptocurrency, and everything seems to be mixed in an entire basket, no? So how do we actually start framing the narrative? We start framing this narrative by saying there is this Web3, which is this space of internet that allows for decentralized transactions amongst stakeholders. And then you have blockchain as, let's call it, the underlying language where Web3 actually runs, correct? But then we have certain technologies that have enabled for this internet to become much more sensorial, correct? And it's not a coincidence that this wave of decentralization has actually brought forth a new way to experience the internet. And what a lot of people call the metaverse, which is actually from a Neil Stephenson novel in which he coined this initial terminology of this spatial representation of the internet where data was fluid and where people could actually navigate through this realm of information and actually be an elite of knowledge holders. It can have a lot of definitions, and I think one of the beauties of the metaverse is not to let it be encapsulated both by extremists who actually only categorize the metaverse as a pure 100% decentralized new representation of the internet, and seeing it more as a very fluid era where internet can have different sorts of experiences. And this is what I like to call the age of the experience internet, where technologies such as gamification, graphics, and the way in which stakeholders actually engage change fundamentally the ways in which we experience the world. Now for the second part of our talk. I think it was very important to frame a little bit the context or the narrative of how this evolution from Web 1 to Web 2 to Web 3 has led the user through this gradual experience in which he could only read and write without a lot of interaction of data to actually have this capacity to interact in an integral platform with the trade-off of giving its data to now a business model or a platform where stakeholders or individuals can actually transact amongst each other without the need of central intermediaries. I think we framed that as part of this narrative of this evolution from Web 1 to Web 2, Web 3. And we also discussed something very important. Aside from this ownership economy, we talked a little bit about the experience internet, this new manifestation of the internet that could be seen as a spatial representation of the internet, this evolution where technology is allowing not only for decentralizing relationships among stakeholders, but also to experience social interactions in a different way. And one could even propose that we are in the midst of a new transformational technological revolution in which markets are being disrupted. So this gives the possibility to actually not only disrupt the current economic systems, but also create new markets. It gives us this capacity to actually change the way social interaction is conducted amongst individuals or communities, but it also fundamentally changes the way in which we as human beings experience our environment. And with the birth of this new experience internet, what we are actually envisioning is utilizing and leveraging new technologies such as graphics, the capacity to actually create environments, and this thanks a lot to the evolution of gamification, that has allowed for this spatial internet with 3D assets, renderization technologies such as Unreal Engine are allowing us to create we want to call it twin representations of our physical lives, no? And obviously we are at the early stages of what we call the metaverse, or this experience internet. And it's a very logical or natural stage that we as innovators or disruptors, whenever we encounter a new technology, we tend to replicate the environment we know. You know, and there's this common phrase that says, first we replicate and then we innovate. And I think the metaverse right now is at a stage where we are seeing a lot of replication. We're trying to see our traditional business models, whether we're a large retailer or a banking institution, and we're trying to incorporate what our current business model and replicate it in a metaverse or an experience internet environment and ecosystem. And I think that's part of this environment that has great potential, correct? It's still very hyped, but we still have a couple of infrastructure requirements that are quite not there yet. No, 5G might not be sufficient to carry us through a fully immersive experience, to fully be able to load the capacity of data we need to access this high quality of graphics. No, obviously the experiences are starting to become attractive enough to have it their own place in the market, but it still hasn't created its own decentralized market that creates its own value proposition. So how our brands are actually approaching this. I think we have to approach marketing in the metaverse or marketing in Web3 from three distinctive, I won't say value propositions, but from three perspective or distinctive points of view. One of them has to be from the perspective of how a company is going to actually communicate to its new generations of potential consumers. No, understanding that there is a pivotal shift between not only the traditional baby boomers and its evolution to Generation X or newer generations such as millennials, but that there is a fundamental shift from millennial to Gen Z. No, a generation of consumers that are completely digitally immersed, that their formation as native digital generations have made them being very sensible to actually the principles of community building. They understand the value of digital currency, and they understand the value of digital transactions. They understand the value of actually engaging in social dynamics through gamification, no? And you could say that they're metaverse ready generations. So how are companies going to approach this new segment of consumers? The second approach, I think, is how are companies going to approach, with the advent of Web3, how are they going to approach tokenization, decentralization, and propose value propositions of products or services that cater to a market that is much more conscientious about their data, that value privacy, correct? And that they have a completely different perspective on how the relationship between their counterparts, such as a company that's providing them the services, should treat them as consumers. No? And the third, I think that it's very, very relevant and very important, is how are companies going to shift or change the way they actually communicate with their communities or with their target audiences, so to speak. And this all happens fundamentally, and I think behind these three pillars that we discussed, or these three ways of approaching marketing in the metaverse or marketing in Web3, it has an underlying change of the dynamics of consumers, no? And this is something that is very, very motivated and fueled by decentralization of a blockchain technology, but it's this fundamental change of consumers not wanting to be targeted audiences anymore, but rather becoming stakeholders and shareholders in the projects or the products or the services that are being offered by companies. So in this fundamental change, we are seeing now that the new Web3 communities, they're fueled by common interests, obviously by the prospectus or by the appeal of having a potential reward in the future, correct? And also by leveraging the strengths of the community to actually promote the value services. So you could imagine or envisioning a company that wants to actually engage into a Web3 strategy and talk to new communities or to new audiences, that they might have to change the way they actually perceive their consumers. Because all companies at the end of the day, they have brands, and they understand the value that their brands actually bring to their consumers, and they try to actually convey these benefits to the consumer so that the consumer actually buys the product or the service and then has some sort of benefit and then actually rebuys or repurchases. In this change of dynamics now, we have to start seeing almost the consumers as becoming now shareholders in the company. And you're going to actually utilize them as part of your marketing, as part of your development strategy, as part of your focus groups, and as part of your, let's call it, a promotional or go-to-market strategy. And if you start envisioning that there is a shift between a audience to community and between consumers and or customers and now shareholders or stakeholders, then the Web3 space becomes very, very attractive to develop new and novel mechanisms. And this is what I mean from transitioning from just replicating to actually innovating. Once companies start seeing this fundamental change, they're going to be able to actually adapt their marketing strategies and treat their customers now as what they truly want to be, which is part of the process, part of the company, part of the value proposition, and grow together through this continuous positive or negative feedback loop that actually fuels community building. And I think this leads us to this fundamental change also of understanding that if in Web 2 we had audiences and we were trying to capitalize these audiences, obviously through SEO marketing or through ads or from different perspectives or mechanisms or tools available through traditional marketing strategies. Now in the era of the ownership economy, marketing is done very, very different. It has to start by leveraging and empowering your communities. And from your communities, you have to start trickling down this capacity to communicate or articulate your messages of your value proposition. And it's very important that you have to maintain constant communication, because now they're not consumers anymore. Now there's a shift also of entitlement, because now they're part of your company, they're part of your products. And now communication has to be permanent, correct? It has to be honest, correct? And it has to be in a language that is adequate and tailored to the needs and to the obviously demographic that you're speaking to. So I think that when we're talking about this wonderful new era that a lot of companies are approaching, it all starts from the CEO traditionally. The CEO recognizing that there is an importance in understanding what are going to be the implications of the metaverse, how these technologies are impacting the business. And CEOs are usually very pro analyzing the potential impacts and trends, because they're seeing that there is this movement, correct? And they're going to their C-suite teams and they're going to them and they're telling them effectively, we have to analyze this. We have to study the relevance of these new tendencies, how they apply to our business, correct? And should we or should we not get into this space, and how should we do it? So I think in terms of the CEO level, this is pretty clear that there's potential, and that we should definitely explore in any industry how to actually approach this. I think where it gets more complex is when you start going into the C-suite level. No, does the chief marketing officer actually understand the relevance of the metaverse and the technologies? Is this a marketing play, or should I take it up to the CIO? Or should I approach it as a technology play and just kick it over to my CTO? So I think it's very important for the C-suite executives to actually have a broad understanding of this evolution from Web 1 to Web 2 to Web 3, understand the metaverse as a way to actually captivate, passive audiences, which are much more curated, call them communities, and they have very, very specific wants, needs, alignment of interests that if you actually are able to cater to them, they become an incredible, powerful tool. And we have a lot of examples in Web3 and with NFT projects and in community building of successful stories where the actual community members become such a pivotal or important part of the value proposition of the company behind the products and services that they actually start running and dictating the path. No, and we talk a lot about DAOs and how decentralized autonomous organizations might look in the future, but those are more complex. Those are more complex scenarios, which they can be actually very well de-articulated to the principles and essentials of marketing. So I think just as a summing up, or giving a little bit of a brief of concepts. The purpose of this chat or this talk was actually to lay the foundations of how to actually approach the metaverse and Web3 from a marketing perspective and from an enterprise perspective, understanding that there has been this evolution of the internet, there's been this change in the dynamics of how consumers have actually migrated to now stakeholders. There's this shift towards the ownership economy, which is empowered by the decentralization of relationships between economic actors, and the fact that there is this new experience internet that allows us to view our products or services or interact in a digital world in a completely different way. And just as a summation, or to summarize, when do I think that the metaverse will become relevant as a play, not only for humanity, but for companies and for obviously startups and SMEs that are trying to present or approach the customer acquisition in a different way? I think it's all about utility. No, it's all about utility. We have to understand that this is a beautiful technology that is in the process of getting there. We're going to see, I believe, in 2023, a lot of experimentation. I would like to call it a lot of return of learning experiences, no, where companies are going to actually start identifying the why. Why do I want the metaverse? Is it relevant for my business? Do I want it to give my existing customers a new experience? Or do I want to cater to a completely new segment of consumers? These are all important questions that can be solved through certain sessions of ideation, which is very important to level the playing field and then structure certain methodologies to actually help or allow companies to get there. But I think just as the closing argument, I believe the metaverse is truly a technological revolution. I believe that it will effectively disrupt markets and create new market opportunities. I do think that it's going to shape the dynamics of social interaction. I think it's definitely going to change the way we experience our daily lives. And I think that the true relevance of the metaverse will take place when the utility value of our digital self becomes equal or greater than that of our physical self. So when we actually have the capacity to leverage the power of our digital identities and our digital twins, let's call it, in a digital space and create a value which is equal or greater than what we're actually creating in the physical space, then the metaverse will become a very, very interesting play. So I want to thank you very much for your time on this second chapter of marketing in the metaverse or marketing in Web3. And I want to thank the entire team at Toroblocks for inviting me to this incredible event. Thank you very much. Have a good night.